music in the worship of the church. This goes along with the lesson we had on reasons for a cappella music in the worship of the church. And we're not going to cover those reasons at all. If you want to go back and look at those, re-look at that lesson. The first reason that people give me for using instrumental music in the worship of the church is it's allowed in the Old Testament. Well, on a practical note, do you really want to be found thinking and living your life based on the rules of the Old Testament? Well, you can't eat ham, you can't have bacon, or any other pork products. If you go back to animal sacrifices, there was a law that you had to marry your brother's widow to have children for him. Well, we don't want to do that either, do we? You would stone rebellious children. You weren't even allowed to wear clothes of different fabrics. Those all had reasons in the Old Testament, and they were rules. Practically, if you're going to take one thing from the Old Testament, you have to take it all. But now let's look and see if we should be doing that. Turn to Colossians, the 2nd chapter, and verse 14. By canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands, this he set aside, nailing it to the cross. The old law was nailed to the cross. It's not for us anymore. To help understand that, let's turn to Hebrews, the 8th chapter, and verse 5. They serve a copy and a shadow of the heavenly things. For when Moses was about to erect the tent, he was instructed by God, saying, "See that you make everything according to the pattern that was shown you on the mountain." But as it is, Christ has obtained a ministry that is much more excellent than the old, as the covenant he mediates is better, since it is enacted on better promises. The old covenant, the old rules, the old law are gone. They're a shadow. They're a type. Turn to Hebrews 10, verse 1. For since the law has but a shadow of the good things to come, instead of the true form of these realities, it can never, by the same sacrifices that are continually offered every year, make perfect those who draw near. The old covenant was just a shadow. We want the reality. Turn to Galatians 3, 24 and 25. So then the law was our guardian until Christ came, in order that we might be justified by faith. But now that faith has come, we are no longer under a guardian. For in Christ Jesus you are all sons of God through faith. We can see that just because it was allowed in the Old Testament doesn't mean that we should do it today. The second reason is, well, they have instrumental music in heaven. Revelation 14:2 is the verse that's usually used, so we'll go look there. And I heard a voice from heaven, like the roar of many waters, and like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. Well, that doesn't say that there were harps playing. It says a sound like. If I was to say that somebody had a face like a horse, you know that it's not literal. It is a It is like. It is similar to. And even if it was, heaven is where God lives. In the Old Testament, the temple was where God lives. And we did discuss on the other one that there was instrumental music in the temple where God lives. Well, today, the temple is Christians where God lives. It had nothing to do with the synagogue worship, which never had instrumental music. So, if it's in heaven, it's in heaven, or it's inside of us. The third reason is, well, it doesn't say not to. Well, I kind of get a laugh out of this because many times we in the Church of Christ are accused of being legalistic and straining at gnats and just, but there's nothing that I can think of as being more legalistic than the argument, it doesn't say not to. That's the trick that we as children try to use on our parents to say, oh, no, you didn't say not to. I'm legally bound. I'm using the law here on you. You didn't say not to. Well, think back. Did that work on your parents? No, it didn't work on them, and it's not going to work on God. And we know that that is a crazy argument. It's come into our laws now. We now have to have signs on coffee cups saying that the coffee is hot. Because there wasn't a sign that said, don't put it in your lap and move the car because you might get burned. There is actually a label that I have seen on Facebook that about some baby's onesies, and it says, remove child before washing. Because so many people like it didn't say not to. It didn't work with your parents. It's not going to work with God. That's not a good reason. Number 4 is, I like it. It helps me. And that seems to be one of the most logical reasons. It helps me to worship. I like it. But let us think about the idea of worship. The Greek word that's used, translated as worship, is proskuneo. It's called kiss toward. Show your love toward. When you worship God, you're showing your love toward God. Well, do you give your spouse presents that you want, or do you give them what they want? If you want to have a happy life, you probably should give them what they want, because you're doing it for them. The worship in the church is worship toward God. It's not worship toward me. It's not worship toward you. And we need to do those things that will please the one that our worship is aimed toward. It's what does God want? What does God like? Now, our 5th is another one that really does seem to have a really good logical base. It's my talent. God gave me this talent. Shouldn't I use it to His glory? Well, the answer is yes, it's your talent. And yes, you should use it to the glory of God. Every talent we have should be used to God's glory. But we don't have tap dancing in the worship. We do have potlucks where people use their talent for cooking, but that's not part of the worship in the church. The question is not, can't I use my talent for playing guitar or playing the piano to God's glory? You absolutely should. But does that give you the right to use it in the worship of the church? Go back to the reasons for a cappella and see what God demands people to worship Him, how He wants to be worshiped, and then go, yes, it's my talent, and I should do to the glory of God. Every time I go to Silver Dollar City, there is usually a gospel singing group that uses instruments. And they always start out by saying, we're going to do this to the glory of God. And that's wonderful. Because as we looked in the other, we're talking about the worship of the church. Not temple worship and not private worship, but the worship of the church. So that's a good thing, but that still doesn't say you have the right to use that in the worship of the church. The sixth one is all the churches do it. Well, that is an old argument. It's been used